Welcome to the Trauma Informed Lens podcast. I'm your host, Matt Bennett. Each episode we talk about the research and practical aspects of the trauma informed movement. This podcast is not designed to replace mental health services. If you feel uncomfortable or triggered by our discussion, please consider seeking your own trauma treatment. In no way is seeking treatment an admission of weakness. It is a chance to build resiliency and experience post-traumatic growth. You can find show notes, resources, and more at traumainformedlens.org. Welcome, friends, to the Trauma Informed Lens podcast. I'm Matt. I am here with my good friend today, Dr. James Petrovich from Fort Worth, Texas, and TCU. So James and I have known each other for a couple years now. He's had me out to Fort Worth a few times, and I've been really impressed with James because he's a man who seems to say no to nothing. My joke with him is, I first met him and he's got this prestigious title. I think, what are you, James? You're the chair of the Department of Social Work at a top 100 university in the country. And
Yep.
I'll just never forget, he was help opening a day shelter for folks experiencing homelessness. And one of my first impressions of him was hosing vomit off a sidewalk. So don't let all his accolades and titles fool you. His real skill is getting vomit off the sidewalk. So James, it's great to see you, my friend. Thanks for joining us. I hope you're staying safe and healthy amid this pandemic we're all going through.
Thanks, Matt. Yeah, staying safe and healthy. Wish the same for you. But yeah, social work. It's a multifaceted profession. It involves power washing and intense clinical skills. So it's a beautiful thing.
Absolutely. And I want to pick your brain on a few of these different hats that you've taken on.
Sure.
And the first one is, one of the things I've been really fascinated with and was just honored to be a visiting chair at TCU back in February before the world changed on us, is how do we really prepare our future leaders, our future social workers, therapists, physicians, nurses, professionals coming out, so they have that trauma-informed lens from the get-go. And the other thing is, as we've talked about, that lens also includes a little bit of understanding how to take care of yourself and how to lead us forward in this movement we're in. So I know you've done a lot of thinking, allowed me to be a little part of it, to work with your students and your great faculty there, about looking at a department of social work and asking yourself and your staff the question, what would it mean for our department to be trauma informed? So as a thinker in this arena, I would love to hear sort of what got you interested in taking this on, and sort of where's your thinking evolved, and what sort of work has your department done to take those not always easy steps forward to becoming a trauma-informed social work department?
Absolutely. Wow, that's a major three-part question, and I may need you to help me remember the different parts. But
I like to drop the bombs early, my friend.
You did. I'll say the kind of the genesis for this was just having practice as a social worker and just still carrying those experiences with me. I mean, it's been a while since I was a full-time social worker, but I still remember whether I was doing substance disorder treatment or mental health treatment or working with people experiencing homelessness. I just vividly in my mind can still kind of see some of these folks and see their experiences, see what they've been through. And then as a researcher, in academia, coming in and really wanting to further explore homelessness, what are the things that lead someone into homelessness? What is their experience of homelessness? And then what is it like to journey out of it, has also, again, taken me into hearing really rich personal narratives of just trauma. And, that in the midst of just I mean, there's so much intersectionality with homelessness. I mean, you have the mental health and substance use, and you have the domestic violence. Then you have this, the institutional historical racism. Then you have sexism. Then you have heterosexism. I mean, all these things are coming together, and they're just affecting different subpopulations differently. But a lot of them, they're just ending up in this kind of same geographic location, like a homeless shelter or something. And so for me, to want to be as effective as I can be, and hoping to help folks to the extent that I can, to kind of move along and have a better life as a practitioner, it was impossible to ignore the impact of trauma. And then to go into and now be kind of educating the next generation of social workers, it just felt like to not invest substantial time and energy into exploring what trauma is, what it does to people, what is resilience, and how do you help folks, is just a disservice. It's a disservice to our students, and it's a disservice to the profession and the clients we serve. So that's why we kind of took this flag and started running with it. And we're not the only ones. I mean, the University of Buffalo School of Social Work they are a resource. I mean, I go to their website and I'm looking at what they're doing, and they're doing amazing things. And if anything, we want to just carry their work forward. It's not about recreating the wheel. It's about furthering it and just kind of spreading the seeds out, and hopefully something will germinate. Locally in my department, and I think this was the second part, is, what got my attention? What are we doing now? Is that the next part?
Yep. Doing good.
I mean, it's knowing who the experts are and reaching out to them. There's no need to recreate the wheel and try and learn a whole new area of interest. I mean, we had a woman, a faculty member from, I think she was from Syracuse, come down a couple of years ago, Terry Combs-Orm, and she's all about epigenetics. And so she kind of got us started on thinking about neurobiology and what that does, and how kind of neurobiology and the intersection with the environment. And then what you and I did at True Earth Place, I mean, originally meeting you at the Healthcare for the Homeless conference in Portland. And then just your message really resonating, and just kind of, it was like, this is it. And it's amazing how you can spend, a 20-year career, and be seeing trauma every day and be responding to trauma every day, but never see it for what it is, and it's kind of sad in a way, because a lot of times I have to admit, I was responding to symptoms and coping behaviors instead of dealing with the real issue. And so I want my students to avoid that. I don't want them to go in and do more harm, because that's not what we're about. So
yeah, I have this fantasy that obviously is never probably going to happen unless our technology advances, to go back and interview like 24-year-old Matt. Like I as a young therapist, I would like, I just love to ask myself, the question is, why do you think they get stuck in these behavioral patterns? Why do you think this subsection of our population struggles with poverty generation after generation? Because I was in child welfare, housing, like I was in the midst of all those intersections, and yet, I don't know if I was working, I think, from just maybe trying to survive and do the best that I could. But I totally agree with you. It's like, what was I thinking? And I've been thinking about trauma, writing about for so long. I've disconnected from that self back then. But yeah, I think I think it'd be interesting to go back and interview our younger selves and ask, what do you think is behind all of this?
I would cringe watching myself. I would just be like, oh, really? I did substance use treatment for probably 10 or 15 years. I was doing experiential therapy. So I was doing ropes courses and stuff. And I love that. It was great to work with folks in that environment, that milieu, so to speak. But we were also a very abstinence-based medical model program. And so just the messages we were sending people about, it's a disease, you're never going to be able to get rid of it. If you drink again, you'll die. We were very 12-step based, which I think there's a place for that. But we were not in any way trying to kind of meet people where they were at, and understand that every person walking through our door brought a story with them. In a lot of ways, we were not interested in hearing that. And to me, it was such a disservice, because I mean, so much of what I think they were doing was trying to make sense of what they had been through.
Yeah.
And, and going back and I wish, coming in with a more empathetic, understanding, just inquisitive and curious mind of just kind of, tell me what's happened to you. And, so and I think that personally for me started when I went and I was working at a residential treatment center in New Jersey for adjudicated adolescent boys, youth. And they were very evidence-based, very research-based. And that was where I first got introduced to this idea that, understanding the research, what does the literature say? What are the evidence-based practices? What is the science telling us about this stuff? And as much as possible, trying to integrate it. And, culture, organization, they struggle sometimes with that. They're so set on this is our way, this is the way we've always done it. And I'll be honest, our Department of Social Work was kind of the same way. We talked about the same theorists we've always talked about, like ecological systems theory and, Adler and Erickson and all these guys. And it's just like, I mean, the world has evolved so much, but what have we done to evolve with it? And how are we leveraging all this new information that's really pretty readily available? I mean, ACE is not new, but it was new for us 3 years ago, 4 years ago. And I still run into people now and they're like, ACEs? What is that? So, so for us, it's just been a journey, and you've been a part of that. I mean, the work we did with the day shelter and then bringing you back to kind of as the visiting chair to share your message and your wisdom and understanding of trauma and trauma-informed care. I mean, it really did set a stage. And so now the challenge for us is, how do we look at our curriculum? How do we look at our operations as a department? This whole COVID thing, we're all just living in one big trauma. Right. And so it's been interesting to see how the universities responded. Some of the measures they're taking are pretty practical. It's like, well, we just got to do this and do that. But it's not acknowledging the challenges that we're all experiencing. I mean, a lot of people have it worse, don't get me wrong, but we all have it. It's all difficult. And so trying to just think, at least with my own faculty and staff, is continuing to check in with them. Are you taking care of yourself? Are you getting out? Are you going for a walk? Are you still practicing social distancing, but doing things that help you kind of rejuvenate, recharge, and just somehow try and feel as good as you can in the midst of this insanity? It's crazy. Yeah.
So let's talk about, one of the things that, I love our conversations about and thinking about too is, looking at the surveys out there. I mean, we know anybody that enters the helping healing profession, so many of us come from our own trauma histories in childhood and adulthood. And, again, the most recent research I've seen is social workers are solidly in the top 5 for occupations that burn out. So I wonder, because I mean, I think we've done historically, and I'm not going to pick on social workers here, because as a master student of community counseling or community psychology, I got 0 education on my own self-care, which is why I burnt myself out pretty much the first 10 years of my career. I was just burnt out. So I wonder if, knowing, having that awareness of trauma, and knowing that so many of your students, so many of the students at TCU in general come from a trauma background, if you look at the ACE study, but more so being drawn to the social work helping arena, how has your understanding of trauma informed kind of how you approach self-care? You talked about a little bit of your staff, but what are some of the things you're working to get tools for your students as they enter the workforce and, kind of walk into the fire of the vicarious secondary trauma, compassion fatigue that we know awaits them?
Absolutely. It's funny because we just, I think I talked to you about it while you were here, but we've been working with a big day shelter in Dallas, serves about 800 people a day who are experiencing homelessness. And we they were asking us to help kind of understand how to improve their care management program, case management.
Yeah.
And so we went in, and one of the things we did was we did the secondary traumatic stress survey, the STSS. And we had done it previously in Fort Worth, and we found that 40% of the people we surveyed, homeless assistance service providers, I mean, like frontline staff, had either moderate or severe STSS. And that was like 120 of them.
Yeah.
So the group we did over in Dallas, much, much, much smaller group. We had, I think, 12 people who responded. All of them had moderate to severe secondary traumatic stress. And so it's real, it's happening. You know, with our students, what we're trying to do, even in the midst of their education, which is rigorous and it's challenging and it asks a lot from them. And so, you know, in social work, we're doing field internships where they're working in an agency 16 to 20 hours a week on top of classwork, because it is a lot about kind of helping them be proactive about it versus reactive. And that's one of the things I learned from you is come in with a plan before it hits the fan, because when it hits the fan, you're much less likely to come up with a really good plan.
Then we rely on those unhealthy coping skills a little bit more.
Exactly, because they come so easy sometimes.
Yes, they come bottled, canned. Yes.
Yes, they do. So we've been talking a lot about, you know, how do you stay connected to things that are that really help you relieve stress, hobbies, other interests. You know, how are you able to disengage from the job? Can you in some way leave it there as much as possible? Spend time with people you care about. Just find the things that nourish your soul and do those. But the other thing that I'm trying to help our students understand, and I think this will resonate with you, is that I want to change the conversation. I don't want, because a lot of times what we do is we project it as you need to take care of yourself. Mm-hmm. And we put all the responsibility on the practitioner. Like, you need to, when you go home, take a bubble bath, or, you know, whatever, watch a movie and all this other stuff. But we don't acknowledge, I think, as systems and as providers and as employers, our responsibility to our workers to provide space and to help them identify self-care practices that they can do on the job, and creating policies and procedures and practices and giving them the trainings they need and making sure they take time off and making sure they get time off. I mean, all that stuff to me is the other side that we're just not talking about as much. So what we do is, so we get these kind of burned out, re-traumatized, vicariously traumatized folks, and then we blame them. Well, I guess that when they go home, they're not doing their bubble bath like they should.
Yeah. And that's, I mean, such a powerful point, because again, as I say in my trainings, it's like, I have yet to see an individual, no matter how good they are at quote unquote self-care, which is, as you say, is traditionally what you do when you leave work and before you come in the next day. If you've got to go to a dysfunctional work environment, you can't, I've never seen somebody stay healthy in that, you know. Eventually you become that environment, because, you know, the work itself is enough to overwhelm me. You'll find this interesting. I just did an informal survey, because I found out how to do polls in Zoom. So I was doing a webinar, and 80% of the people, we had about 60 people on the webinar, 80% of them identified to be in the first stage of burnout. I think only about 12% said they weren't in any of the stages. And part of that is, you know, we're in the middle of a pandemic, but I just thought, here's all the folks taking care of others whose immune systems and psychology is also not where it needs to be. And I understand why, and it didn't surprise me one bit that it was, I mean, you could have been 100% experiencing some level of burnout or trauma and wouldn't have surprised me at all. But I mean, it's like, it just, you know, we're the ones people look at for help and empathy and compassion. And, you know, we're missing a big chunk of, I think, our ability to provide quality services if we're all a mess ourselves.
Absolutely. No, and I think, and then like you said, I mean, the burnout comes, and then you lose. I mean, how expensive is it to replace someone who's been at your agency for 5 years, and they come in committed and dedicated, and they invest themselves in this job, and they learn so much. And then for a number of reasons, fault maybe on both sides, they leave. And you know what, at the time, maybe it's good for them to leave, for themselves and the clients they're serving. But what a lost opportunity that is. And it costs a lot of money. And I think that's, if agency, to me, it's a small investment that could yield a big reward, but money's so tight that trainings and time off and all this stuff, I mean, it just has such an immediate impact. But we've got to find ways as a community to support these systems to be healthier.
Yeah, and I think to rethink what it means to, if our mission is to provide quality, because it takes a different kind of thinking about the numbers. Because if, a seasoned staff turns over and you hire somebody cheaper on one line item, that looks pretty good. But we know, up to 18 months of a salary it takes to get somebody up to quality. And when lives are at stake, and maybe indirectly getting somebody housed, knowing the resources, what's the cost to the community as well as the organization? And we've got to make that shift. Other industries have done it weirdly so much better than we have.
Oh, absolutely.
It's time we catch up with our friends in tech around treating human beings ethically.
Because that's only what we say we do.
Let's do no harm to ourselves. That would be a really freaking good place to start. So the other thing I wanted to talk to you about, and I want to give just a shout out to my Fort Worth friends that might be listening to this, is you've also, because like I said, you seem to not say no to anything that comes across your plate. You've taken on a leadership role of helping Fort Worth become a trauma-informed community. And if you're not familiar with Fort Worth, it's sometimes, I think for us outsiders, Dallas and Fort Worth is a large city, and I'm not sure, I can never figure out where Dallas ends and Fort Worth begins, because it just seems like one massive humanity in between those two cities. But I wondered, obviously I think much of your thinking to bring this into the social work department probably motivated you to bring this to the community. But I just that's a pretty big undertaking that you took on. So how did that come about, and what are some of your goals for that very ambitious initiative?
It started really kind of serendipitously. I was asked to go to a meeting, to stand in for someone at a meeting for an organization called the Mental Health Connection, which is our local kind of community advocacy, mental health advocacy organization that came about after a church shooting in a section of town. It was called the Wedgwood. I think it was Wedgwood Baptist Church. And a man walked in, and I think he shot 7 people, killed 7 people, and wounded a bunch more. And after that, what the community said was, we need access to care, and we need access to quality care, mental health care. And so that's what this organization was kind of tasked with doing. And so I went to this meeting, and I was asked to join a subcommittee where we were looking at identifying screening and assessment tools for trauma and resilience, because the organization wanted to create like an information clearinghouse. So we worked with some amazing professionals from the community, from some of the major stakeholder organizations like the Fort Worth ISD and John Peter Smith Health Network and Cook Children's Hospital, Tarrant County Public Health. So what we wanted to do was create a web resource that folks could go to, and practitioners, member organizations of Mental Health Connection, and see kind of the best practice evidence-based tools that were out there. And so that's what we did. So we started with that. And then right as that work was ending, I was asked to help facilitate the development of a community-wide public relations campaign around trauma. And so that's something that's in the works. We were hoping to have rolled it out May 1, but COVID happened. #COVID. So we've backed it up, but it's an initiative. It's funded by the Morris Foundation, one of our great local philanthropic organizations, supported you coming to town to provide training. And, you know, it's really meant to change public awareness in our county and in our city about trauma, because it's absolutely here. I mean, we have every kind of trauma you want to think about. It's happening and has happened in our community, and we're spending, you know, lives are being impacted every day. As a community, we're spending millions of dollars a year on everything, all the mental health, substance use, the chronic, the health, all that stuff. And so that was the goal. And so I was asked to chair that. I work with, we have an organization in town called Lena Pope, and it's started as kind of a children's home. And I work with someone there, Sandra Mosley, and she and I are working together with the folks at MHC with some really great PR folks and some great web design folks. And it's been a really unique but very rewarding experience. I mean, I've brought very little to the table, I think, of value, but it's been so valuable for me to work with all these amazing folks who are really committed to getting the word out in a way that folks can hear and understand, and ideally maybe seek some help. Yeah. And so that's what we're trying to do. And, you know, we, again, all the big organizations are there, the ISDs, the healthcare providers, mental health. There's a real momentum. I don't know, you know, everybody, we're all hunkered down at home. So we haven't been able to get together face to face. So I think the momentum's still there. I mean, we're pushing ahead with the PR campaign. You know, our work, you know, when we brought you to town, was really it's great to educate the public, but if we don't have organizations and systems in place ready to serve in a trauma-informed way, then we're not doing what we said we're not going to get anywhere. So, so there is that energy and the community around organizations really looking at themselves, which is such a courageous thing to do, because I mean, you start peeling back the layers and the work reveals itself. Yeah. And this is not going to be an easy undertaking. And it's going to challenge a lot of long held beliefs, and it's going to push some paradigms, and, you know, but people seem to be willing to step up to the plate. And I mean, you're right. And we are I think right now we're the 11th largest city in the U.S., and we're probably going to be the 9th largest in a matter of a couple years. Wow. So we got a lot of people that are being impacted every day, and we want to do what we can. It's, you know, I mentioned University of Buffalo. They've done a lot of work around trauma-informed organizations. They've touched on the community piece as well. Some other groups have as well. But you know, there's kind of model communities around the country, like Tarpon Springs in Florida, and, you know, Washington State is supposedly a trauma-informed state. So we're out there and we're looking at folks are doing, but we're all really kind of at the very beginnings of this. Yeah. There's no manuals out there. I mean, we all look at Tip 57, and, you know, we're all doing the best we can. So, I mean, we're trying to learn from what they're doing. Hopefully they'll learn from what we're doing, and we can kind of make this thing happen.
Awesome. And it was amazing. We did a 3-day stint with self-care, trauma-informed care, and trauma-informed leadership. And it was a great 3 days. There was so much great energy in that room. And yeah, I was just honored to sort of be the cheerleader ahead of the game. With it. And, you know, with all that great energy, this is I'll throw a tough one at you here, but I think it's something a lot of times I think there's so much that hits us in the face when we're like, oh my goodness, a trauma-informed community, because I think we can point out the weak, or then maybe not the weak, but the parts of our communities who have so far to go. Right. If you were to look into the future, let's say 10 years, and your group, TCU, Fort Worth, all your partner agencies that are working so hard, if you're really successful, what would be some of the things you would see, you know, in Fort Worth, 2030, well, what are some of the characteristics that may have changed or developed in the next 10 years if you all are successful at this huge paradigm shift slash system, multiple
Yeah.
system changes?
Yeah. That's a great question. You know, it's one we're wrestling with because we want to measure, did it work? You know,
Yeah,
what does it look like? And so we've been talking, I mean, and that's been one of the things of working with the Morris Foundation is not just infusing money, but infusing money, but also how do we know that we did it? We
yeah,
moved the needle. We accomplished our goal. So I think what we're talking about right now is really going back and looking at some of these discrete systems and really looking at, you know, within criminal justice or healthcare or mental health care or substance use, what are some of the things that we can really look at in terms of service delivery, or, you know, kind of the environment of care that we're creating that we know aren't trauma informed, and we're actually doing it. So
yeah.
I know, you know, JPS Health Network is our local public health provider, and they've been really kind of at the front edge organizationally of trying to be more trauma informed. And so they've been tracking in their behavioral health division kind of the use of restraints
Mm,
and how have restraints gone, because and what they've been trying to do is integrate more collaborative client-centered practices, de-escalation techniques and things like that. And so it looks like I mean, restraints are down, and so it looks like that's working. And, you know, in a school district, you know, looking at suspensions and expulsions and all these things, um, even in law enforcement, you know, which I know is an area that you're starting to delve
mhm.
into, is, you know, and we haven't quite. I mean, they're at the table, they're invested, but it really is kind of identifying what are these meaningful measures that will legitimately speak to whether what we've done has helped. Um, I mean, I think, you know, it's a big ask. It's a big lift for the community because it's not something that happens in over a 3-day training. I mean, you laid the groundwork beautifully. I mean, people left the room energized, but then I think they go back to their agencies and they're like, "Oh boy, where do we start?" You know. So we created kind of we did an assessment. We
Yeah,
created a plan for each organization. You know, the first step is leadership and communication. It's looking at, you know, it's looking at the top and how is information shared, and those, you know, and there's multiple dimensions. And but it's hard work in the midst of incredibly hard work. And
yeah,
so it's something that we as a community are really invested in, saying that we legitimately did it and having the data to back it up, versus just kind of being able to just tick in a few boxes, training being one of them, but also, you know, following up and ongoing support, and understanding that, you know, culture change in an organization, it might take 3 to 5 years.
yeah.
And so it's not just it's a longitudinal ongoing commitment. But we're committed. I mean, we're looking like, I mean, to answer your question, we're every system, we feel like there are key indicators that we can look at. We also do want to measure knowledge acquisition. That's another thing we're looking at. And we're probably going to do some focus groups, pull some people in, trying as much as possible, make them representative of the community. And then I've got some friends at TCU in the marketing and communications department, and we're going to kind of look at some of this creative content and the materials that we're creating around this PR campaign, which is
Mhm.
called Recognize and Rise, and ask them, you know, just do some basic kind of before and after. And
Awesome.
you know, it's lots of flaws and limitations to it all, but it's people. You know, I
Yeah.
wish we were in a lab with working with like basic elements and
You
weighing
can have
this.
a control group and yeah.
Yeah, we could have a controlled community. You know, it's that, but I mean, you know, it's one of those things where it's like the data, you see enough things happening around the country and the story is consistently
Yeah.
good. It's just kind of like the evidence is there. We just need to calm down a little bit on the
Yeah.
science side. It's a good thing. It makes intuitive sense. The clients are responding to it. If you're a practitioner and you start working with folks in this way, it changes the dynamic completely, and
Yeah.
you see it. And so it's, I don't think people are ready to believe, and the evidence is clear.
Yeah.
So I I think we're that's an ongoing area for us. We're doing the work now to make the changes, but we absolutely know, sooner we can identify those measures and start collecting that data, because we do want to say it worked,
Yeah.
and that's a big thing for us, and I think we'll get there.
Yeah. So you have had, and I know you're still at the beginning of your journey to this, but you've also, had a lot of, I mean, success to get this far. And so what would you have any advice? You've spoken to some of the strategy that you have, but I also think it's like maybe for somebody who's, maybe not a community leader like you are in some ways already in your, but maybe just somebody sitting there like, I have a passion for this. I'm sick of people in my community not getting trauma informed care. I might not have the prestige of being the chair of the Department of Social Work, where you get the fancy T-shirt. I know you didn't pay for that. That's you just. And so, what would you give advice to? Maybe there's a few people of like mind and passion wanting to organize something in a generic community. Well, what would just be some of the things you might say? Hey, think about this as you move forward. As somebody who's got a lot of energy going in this direction.
I thought the last question was the tough one. This is the tough one. Well, I think you nailed it. I mean, I think this is a movement that requires champions. Yeah. I mean, I think if you're passionate and you feel led in some respect to kind of take this on, in whatever your role is, maybe you're a clinician or a practitioner of another kind, or just a community member seeing your community suffering. There are ways to be vocal, and people will rally to you. Like-minded folks will find you, and it may take a little bit of time, but I think it's continually just sharing the message of the basic message of what trauma-informed care is. It's what happened to you, not what you're doing or all these other kind of behavior-based things. It's really asking the deeper question. And I think, where you have advocacy organizations that, like in our community mental health connection, or as you encounter practitioners, or you encounter organizations that are speaking that trauma-informed language, around being client-centered or empathetic or supportive, or all those things, is engaging with them. There's a bit of it's not so common of a perspective or a thing that, I mean, it's not like all of a sudden people are just going to show up at your front door saying, let's do this.
Yeah.
You're going to have to be proactive, and you have to go out and find those like-minded folks, but they are out there. I think people in the faith community are seeing, within their own congregations and across the broader community, the impact of trauma. They're dealing with it every day as they're trying to help folks navigate really challenging economic circumstances and family circumstances. So it's just about going and having conversations, and they're ready to make the shift. They just don't have the language yet. So it's not easy work. And for anybody who steps up and says, this is a flag I want to see fly in our community, my hat's off to you already. I mean, I support you spiritually in any other way possible. But I don't think it takes long to get the momentum going. I think our community, when we track it, we've really been looking at trauma and ACEs for probably the last 10 years.
Yeah.
I think what we've done is, especially with the, as just things started to come together and models started to emerge beyond just the basic science of trauma impacts brain physiology, brain chemistry, all the other stuff. Now we've started to develop approaches, and we've got principles and methods I think we're accelerating. You know, we've shifted into third gear, and so it's there. There's lots of resources on the web. There's lots of like-minded folks out there. But I think in a community that's just getting started, it's going to take some time for folks to find each other, you know,
Yeah.
because you're not the only one thinking this way, but there aren't many of you. So you got to figure it out, and you got to go hunt them down.
Well,
So
that's the exciting thing about, I think, the time we live in now, is that there is a different and an escalating every year level of knowledge
yeah,
on this. And I think that the good thing about this is that it's created, I think, a cognitive dissonance in a lot of us, that we know what we've been doing historically hasn't really worked to some extent, and
yeah,
hasn't really maybe worked with some of the folks who are struggling with trauma, who often get put in our prisons and the shelters, those sort of things. So like you said, and I think you speak to it well, is how do we find that like-minded energy and then focus it, because that's the real, I mean, if you just get even 70 people of like-minded energy in a room together without the structure that you spoke about earlier, it's only you'll watch that group, and I've seen this often dwindle down over time, lose focus, or find a really niche sort of focus
yeah,
to look at. And I think that's what I loved about what you're doing is, you have the energy. I think you gave it, I think in February, we kind of gave it a big kick in the butt. It got really high. But you also have that structure once this damn pandemic goes away, where it can hopefully really flow into that transformation, with the knowledge that it's not going to happen tomorrow or the next day or the next day.
yeah.
But to really focus that energy and give it somewhere to go. I think that's the leadership challenge around this now too.
I absolutely agree. I look at, it's been such an interesting journey, and it'll continue to be. I just think this is a marathon. It's not a sprint. But there's such a sense of urgency among folks to bring this to life in their agencies, because they understand it's impacting people every single day. It's impacting their staff and their clients. I mean, people are suffering, and they're not being treated well. And so I so appreciate that. And I think it's how do those, and that's where I think, as someone kind of associated with like the social service world and nonprofits and stuff, but not in it directly, I think that's a role that I can play, to where I can come in and help create environments and systems and processes to keep this thing moving, provide them with the social support they're going to need as they make these, as they kind of, assessments aren't always fun. And as agencies are honestly looking at themselves, they may see things that they don't like. Okay, well then what do you do with that? Well, then you need to start thinking about how are we going to change, and what are we, how are we going to change it? And it's going to take time. And so I think there's got to be multiple levels of stakeholders involved in this. And I have nothing but the most respect for the folks who are doing the frontline work. And I really do believe every day they're doing the best they can. But I think there are opportunities to do better, though. And I think they want to as much as anybody else. It's just, how do we get them the information, the knowledge and skills and the support to do that?
Yeah.
It's honestly, it's something I'm feel very fortunate to have fallen into it. I know I don't do it very well at all. But I honestly feel like in this kind of situation, what you need more than anything is people who consistently show up.
Yeah.
And it's just keep showing up. Sometimes change, it happens in lots of different ways. But unless you keep showing up, you'll never know. And so that's our goal. And I think we're getting there. We've got great organizations, we've got great practitioners, and we find them. And that's the thing, is I think the magic for me working in some of these initiatives has been being able to sit around a table with folks who, who working at the Women's Violence Advocacy Center, or working at the Child Advocacy Center, or the homeless shelter, and just listening to the passion and the enthusiasm that they have for trauma-informed care with their clients, the people who need it the most.
Yeah.
And it's just, I mean, it's awe-inspiring. And so for me to be able to sit at a table with them, I feel very fortunate. And if I can do even just a little bit to support their movement in this journey, I want to absolutely do that.
Wonderful. And I'd love to argue out that you're not good at it, because I think you really are. But hey, talk to your therapist about that. That's not my job. But you've blown me away. That's what I'll give you. I'll give you my personal response. And I know there's some other folks in TCU who treasure you as someone in their community. So we'll have you on. Maybe we should make this a early May tradition, because I think my listeners would love to hear what happened in the course of a year. Because like you said, at the beginning of this journey, I think, people learning from each other as we embark on these very ambitious community-wide transformations is going to be really, really important. So as you know, I'm one of your biggest cheerleaders, and was honored to be a little part of it. And whether you're transforming the world, my friend, running a social work department, or spraying vomit off the sidewalk, you got a lot of respect from this guy. So James, I really appreciate your time. I'll put a little bit of information about James's work at the university, so you can check him out a little bit more on the show notes at traumainformedlens.com. So James, thank you. And thank the listeners as well. So we'll see you soon.
Take care.